This one, Mitch, was so fascinating because I think it opened an even larger can of worms. Shyanne Sellers waived by the Golden State Valkyries before ever suiting up for a game. We discussed it on this pod. We did not know, with her history of knee injuries, exactly how the medicals would check out. Perhaps the reason she fell in this past April's WNBA draft. But ultimately, this idea of rookies playing one preseason game, two maybe in the case of the two players who were waived by the Indiana Fever earlier this week. But obviously, in the case of Sellers, having never actually suited up for a game, already off the roster, now off to the Atlanta Dream. Break down for us what you know about why the now former Maryland Terrapin already on the move in her first season in the W.
My read on it is that this was just a fumble by the Golden State Valkyries. Because I was looking at kind of everything. I first saw the news break that she had been released, and I was like, what the hell is going on here? There was a statement from the head coach who said, Shyanne was a joy. She picked up everything we asked her to. It's just that I have to choose the best 12. Doesn't mean the most talented. It means the best 12. I don't really know what that means. Kareem Copeland, who is with the Washington Post and is very, very plugged into Maryland, really good reporter. You guys should follow him. He tweeted something out that he was told Sellers passed all medical exams before leaving Maryland and with the Valkyries. So the knee wasn't an issue or a factor in the decision. She was diagnosed with a PCL sprain against Texas in late January, 12-week recovery, and was moving fine in camp. So, and also, just before we started this, the Atlanta Dream picked up Shyanne Sellers. So she's there with Carl Smesco now. I think the Valkyries might have just fumbled their first WNBA draft completely. Because I look at you go back and look at what they did, and this is an expansion franchise with their first pick, number 5 overall. They take Juste, who we've talked about, who is not coming over here this season, I'm pretty sure.
Nope. Not as a good rating, although we'll get to another international player who has been spotted in the continental United States in just a bit.
Right. So she's not coming over here this year. Okay, so your first pick is a draft and stash. Okay, fine. Your second round pick, Shyanne Sellers, before you even see her in game action, you just kind of say, I'm good. It just sounds like to me they didn't do their homework.
Especially for a roster, and this has been kind of the critique and the conversation, I think, across the world of sports, because a draft and stash and then a player they've already released for a franchise that, while yes, it had the opportunity through the expansion draft to select a player of their choosing outside of the protected 6 from each of the other WNBA franchises, but largely took players who were glue players. They did not sign any big names in free agency. They did not trade for Kelsey Plum. And so this is a team that has made it known that they knew that they weren't going to be competing in year one. But it's as if, Mitch, they said that they looked at the draft in 2025. They looked at the pro free agency pool and they basically said, we're good. We're going to punt on it. We'll find a bunch of glue players so that we can kind of fill out the roster in that middle third, bottom third for right now. And then we'll focus on 2026 and that draft class and that pro free agency class. And maybe that's where they make a splash, which ultimately it's a fundamental competitive narrative of do you want to allow for one of your professional franchises in a professional league to be acting in such manner?
Yeah, I just it seems that I feel like the Valkyries just fumbled this draft completely. To not even see what Shyanne Sellers looks like in a game is just very strange to me. Did you just get her in camp and decide she wasn't the right fit? And if that's the case, why did you have to get her in camp to decide that? there's plenty of film out there on Shyanne Sellers. She's been starting at Maryland for 4 years, where she's been one of the best players in the Big Ten. I don't get it. It was really baffling to me that they decided to just cut bait so early with Shyanne Sellers. And I hope that it works out for her with the Atlanta Dream. That's a really young team. She's a solid 3-point shooter, as we've talked about before. They got Carl Smesco now. I think that Carl's gotten to see Shyanne Sellers up close a couple times over the past couple of years. It just seems like a fumble to me to the Golden State Valkyries. Again, your first year as a franchise, and you really don't have a rookie that you can sort of market in this way. Now that Caitlin Chen, I guess, is still on the roster. She was their 3rd round pick. Maybe she works out. But it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
But also, isn't Caitlin Chen like every other player that they have on that roster? Like, or at the very least,
right.
like, again, I go back to our conversation from last week's pod, which in case you missed it, you guys can go back and listen. Kate Martin is the face of that franchise right now. If you had told me 2-3 years ago when she was option 3 or 4 at the University of Iowa, I'm not talking her final season. I'm talking the year that they beat South Carolina in the Final Four. Ultimately, for me, that's what's so wild. I can't believe that that's the world we live in, and that's what they've chosen to do.
Yeah, and we'll get our first look at the Valkyries on Tuesday night. They play the Sparks. I'm fascinated just to see like what kind of product they put on the floor and like what the starting lineup looks like and who the leading scorer is. I agree with you. I like at this point, the face of your franchise is Kate Martin, whether you like it or not. And so, yeah, I just don't know. This is really weird to me, and I think it's a massive miss by the Valkyries. Like it just doesn't make sense to me.
That is the number 2 story in this week's starting 5. I think it's easily the second biggest story in the world of women's basketball. So I'm glad we could lead off with that, get all of that off our chest. Let's progress through the other 3 biggest storylines. This next one broadly is perhaps the biggest, even bigger than those 2 that we just went through, Mitch, and that is the ACL tears that we saw across the W. It, of course, brings into question this idea of a 1-week training camp because of when the WNBA draft falls, because of when the women's college basketball calendar comes to an end. And it's a conversation worth having because ultimately you are already bleeding into the month of September. You're already going into football season when it comes to the W playoffs. To see Katie Lou Samuelson go down, I feel like she got to the Seattle Storm 5 minutes ago, and within 3 minutes, she tore her ACL. We were very disappointed on this pod, especially after last week's WNBA preview episode, to see just days later Georgia Amore, the very talented rookie out of Kentucky, go down with the Washington Mystics with an ACL tear of her own. Megan Gustafson with some sort of weird, mysterious leg injury that Becky Hammon claims is just a little stinger or something. She'll be fine. But yet it's listed as a knee injury. There's a lot of injuries that's not even including Aaliyah Edwards and what she's got going on with the lower back contusion, and she's going to be out for 2 weeks for the Washington Mystics. For me, Mitch, it brings into question, why are we having 3 practices, as DeWanna Bonner so eloquently put it on the broadcast of the Fever's exhibition game against Brazil? 3 practices, and then they're having to play actual games, even if they're only preseason.
Yeah. The other injury that I was just reminded of is Benaja Hamilton, who's out for the Liberty this season. I think that the WNBA, because I feel like we've had over the past couple of years now, in big injuries in the preseason. And we've had situations where this sort of ties back to the Shyanne Sellers thing, where like maybe teams, if I could, I guess, absolve the Valkyries a little bit here, which I don't really want to do, but like maybe teams should be given more time to evaluate the players that they have in training camp. I think the WNBA needs to consider moving back its calendar, like maybe a month. I think that there's a case to be made that it runs right up against the end of the college season too closely. There was a lot of talk last year about, when Caitlin Clark was left off the Olympic team and how she was, somewhat grateful for that because she needed a break. Like the college players that come into the WNBA as rookies, like they're basically playing, you start your college preseason in earnest if you're a senior in October. And then you're basically playing all the way until the next October if you make the playoffs. Like Caitlin Clark did last year, she was playing nonstop and only got a break because it was Olympic year. And so they got some time off. So I think the WNBA needs to consider that, like moving your calendar back a month. I mean, like you're already clashing with the NBA playoffs in early in the season. You're already clashing with the NFL late in the season. It's like there's really not a perfect time to do, if you're the WNBA, like trying to find the perfect time in the calendar to have your season. I just think like you should scoot it back a month. And instead of bumping the start of your season up against the end of college, why don't you move it so the end of your season bumps up against college? I think that would be the better way. Like that way you're giving, a rookie like Georgia Amore, who has put a lot of miles on all those knees, was an NCAA tournament team with Kentucky. I think that's, I'm not a doctor, but like I would say that maybe if she got some rest and some rehab and some training and some therapy, like maybe that injury doesn't happen. Maybe if it's a month later to start practice, maybe that injury doesn't happen. I think the WNBA should consider that. And yeah, it's a real bummer like that we're not going to get to see, one of the first round picks play this year because of that, and some other like really star players.
And the argument with Katie Lou is now you look at, and I'm not going to lie to you, Mitch, every W preseason game I watched this week, I held my breath for the entire roster. Like I legitimately was like bracing myself for another ACL tear or some other traumatic injury. And it brings into question because Katie Lou Samuelson obviously played in the Unrivaled season down in Miami this past off season, or in season, the winter season, if you may. And so knowing full well that if those players weren't playing in Unrivaled, they would be overseas. So it's kind of the same difference. But ultimately, it once again begs the question of wear and tear, and the idea of Asia Wilson and Caitlin Clark, arguably the number 1 and number 2 players in the W this year and in women's professional basketball, both saying my body needs a break and I'm just going to relax, work out, do my routine, take care of my body. And now we will see the fruits of that labor versus this idea of, much like these college players, adding even more tread to the tires and then being thrust immediately into game action, seemingly 1 week into training camp.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Like if you push the calendar back a little bit, you're not only giving more time for the rookies, but you also give more time to these vets who are coming into camp either after an off season or after playing Unrivaled or after playing overseas, and like giving them more time to acclimate. I know it's like a hot topic of conversation in a lot of professional leagues. Like, do we actually need preseason games? I don't know. I don't really know where I actually fall on that argument. I think maybe we don't need as many as we have. Like maybe the better thing to do is kind of do what women's college basketball does, where like, North Carolina, for example, they played, they usually play like 2 closed door scrimmages where like, the fans and stuff don't really know about it. I guess the argument with the pro leagues is like your goal is to make money and entertain, right? So it's like, if you're going to have a scrimmage, like you might as well televise it and open the doors for fans so you can make some money off of it. But yeah, I think like to DeWanna Bonner's point, like, having just a handful of days of practice before you're thrown into something that is at game speed, like that's not ideal, right?
No, it's not ideal. And for me, especially after the success of Unrivaled and especially the combined simultaneous success of the TGL, I know it's controversial. Some people didn't like ESPN's broadcast of it, evidently. Point is, they televised the golf league on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday nights during the middle of a time in the calendar year where there's NFL playoffs going on the weekends. There was the college football playoff, the expanded tournament for the first time. You still had the NBA and the NHL going on, and having that midweek viewing still drew enough traction. And so that's why for me, ultimately, you already have the WNBA finals going up against the NFL on Sundays because of how the W had structured the schedule already. That's already a thing. So what's the difference between the finals taking place in September and going up against September NFL and college football regular season games, and it happening into October, especially if you can try to maneuver around the calendar and have some of those pivotal playoff games take place on a Tuesday or a Wednesday night. There's nothing else on the calendar, with all due respect to the MAC. Midweek group of 5 football doesn't start until late October, early November. I say just push the calendar. You are already going up against the big dogs. Who cares if you got to tack on an extra 3 weeks? Take care of your players.